From about the mid-1400s, as the 100 Years' War with England came to an end, French royalty favoured the Loire Valley as their place of residence. Indeed, King Francis was brought up at his mother's chateau in Amboise. That great man from Florence, architect, engineer and painter, Leonardo da Vinci, accepted an invitation to live next door at the Chateau Clos du Lucé. The two chateaux were connected by an underground passage, and da Vinci spent the last years of his life at Amboise, and Francis attended him on his deathbed. "20 miles northeast of Amboise was and still is the Chateau de Blois. The chateau is much famed in England, not least for the romantic illusions of Anne Boleyn treading the stairs of the renowned spiral staircase on the courtyard-facing wall of the Francis I wing. Queen Claude, it seems, persuaded Francis that she preferred Blois to Amboise, and she had the king build the magnificent edifice, which today attracts many thousands of visitors a year. We have a piece of evidence from some years later in 1535, when she was Queen of England, that sheds some light on the relationship with the French royal family, and Marguerite in particular. In September that year, Ambassador Jean d'Interville, he of ambassadors painting fame, arrived in Winchester to tell Henry that King Francis of France had been tasked by the Pope to effect Henry's excommunication from the Church. Anne sent a message back to France with d'Interville. It was to Marguerite, to say her greatest wish, next to having a son, was to see you, Marguerite, again. D'Interville had brought news that the Pope had issued a brief depriving Henry of his realm and his royal dignity. Worse for Anne, the Pope had called on Francis, King of France, her patron, to enforce the excommunication. Said Pope Paul to Francis, "Be ready to execute justice on Henry when required. Remember the great armies with which Francis's forefathers had revenged her," that's Francis, "injuries." The brief cited the execution of Bishop of Rochester John Fisher, which had taken place just a few weeks earlier, and the sacrilegious slaughter of so many other clerks and religious men. The Pope claimed that Henry's actions had exceeded the wickedness of his ancestors and their treatment of Thomas Becket. However, on the other side, the Seymour Cromwell strategy was going to plan. The execution of Fisher and Sir Thomas More had been orchestrated to solicit just such a response from Rome. Anne Boleyn was marooned, her position all but hopeless. She was isolated, surrounded by enemies in England, while to her horror, her friends in France were licensed by the Pope to deprive her husband of his kingdom by force. To save herself from the clutches of the incoming faction, her time was almost gone. The Cromwell-Seymour party had already chosen the next Queen of England. She had but two very distant hopes. The first, that she could deliver a son to Henry, and so bond herself indelibly to the King of England. Or that she returned to her home kingdom, the Kingdom of France. It would have been a heartfelt message to be delivered personally by Dinterville to her mentor in the Loire Valley. She had been pleading for help from France for months. 8 months earlier that year, for example, diplomat Palamedes Gontier had reported to his predecessor, who was now the Admiral of France, Philippe Chabot, and explained that in the afternoon Cromwell took him, Gontier, to the Queen, to whom he delivered the Admiral's letters and charge. She complained of his long delay, which had caused her husband many doubts. She said the Admiral must think of applying some remedy and act towards the King, so that she may not be ruined and lost, for she sees herself near that, and in more grief and trouble than before her marriage. She charged him to beg the Admiral to consider her affairs, of which she could not speak as fully as she wished, on account of her fears and the eyes which were looking at her, her husband's and the Lord's present. She said she could not write nor see him again, nor stay longer. She then left him, the King going to the next room where the dance was beginning, without the said lady going thither. As far as he can judge, she is not at her ease on account of the doubts and suspicions of the King, which he has mentioned before. In September then, Anne was returning slowly to Windsor with the Royal Progress, that is to say the Royal Tour, which had